Hello there, this is Kellendir from Kellendir's Corner, and I have with me today Martial Arts for Dummies, because where our beloved monks in fantasy are concerned, well, a lot of them aren't being the brightest. Today, on How a Nerd Shall Be Armed, we are going to go over 5 ways that monks in fantasy settings are kind of dumb, and 5 ways that we can go and improve the reasons as to why monks might actually use something like unarmed combat, despite its many heavy disadvantages. Sort of looking at how we fail when creating our monks, and ways that we can go and actually make meaningful, kick-punching, flying, leaping, awesome badasses who are actually going to be reasonably believable and not terribly broken, either mechanically speaking or narratively. So, the first problem that we encounter with monks, of our 5, is the fact that hand-to-hand combat just kind of sucks. Like, if you have fists and feet and elbows and the other person has fists and feet and elbows, well, okay, at least in theory, you are equally matched. But we suddenly get to a number of really unfortunate problems. Unarmed combat is, generally speaking, brutally unequalized when you get to differences in height and strength and weight. If you put a sword in somebody's hands, if I take 2 people who are physically similar, right? They're comparable athletes, and I give them a longsword each, and I teach them to fence with it in a similar style, and I have them go at it, well, I mean, odds are, if you only give them a month, they may very well just kill each other. But at least they will have had a fair shot. If we begin to tweak the physical parameters here, if we begin to give one person more reach, more strength, more speed, they will begin to get a series of advantages which will add up. And yet, because of the way a decisive, skilled moment in a longsword fight can alter the outcome so immediately, there is more room for skill to allow a weaker opponent to win the day. And we see this in competitions in HEMA, Historic European Martial Arts, today. This is especially prevalent when we consider the gap in strength between men and women. There are many women who compete at very high levels in HEMA tournaments, despite the fact that there is no gender segregation for these fights. They are shorter, they don't have the same reach as their male opponents, by and by large, and they are generally significantly physically weaker. And it's a tournament. People are definitely putting some serious power into their sword strokes. And yet, we see that with skill, women can climb over that strength gap and wreck people. This is just a lot harder to do in unarmed combat. And some people may be saying, well, what about grappling? Grappling's cool, and grappling was used a lot historically, and grappling is generally part of weapon-based martial arts, because most weapon-based martial arts will eventually devolve into grappling if the 2 of you fight for long enough. Grappling also is an area where you can overcome those physical advantages. However, or advantages or disadvantages. However, we get to problems where when you're on a battlefield, grappling is necessary for everybody. It's not something that only monks are going to practice. There's no division here between the monk who can grapple and the knight who can't. The knight is going to be as good at grappling as the monk, because it is just a core required skill for any armed combatant who's using edged weapons and whatnot in a medieval tech level. That's just a thing. In our fantasy worlds, all of your knights are really good grapplers, unless they are super specialized in a weapon that does not require grappling, which is relatively few weapons, mostly like ranged weapons. So, we've got a problem. Martial arts, like striking martial arts, just don't compare to a sword or a staff. Just a long stick completely trumps feet and fists. Just a fact. We have no way around this. So, if we don't give our monks some way of actually standing up in unarmed combat against somebody with a sword or a staff or a mace or anything, they're just going to die. And oftentimes, the answer is, well, they have this preternatural sensory ability. They can feel the strike coming, and they move more quickly than a normal person. And really, that's not going to cut it. It's just not going to cut it. Swords allow you reach. Reach means I can go and begin cutting at the person before they can effectively do anything or respond, even if, like, they can be significantly faster than me and begin to dart away. And just the reach of the sword means I can cleave a pretty darn large arc in front of me. And if they're just anywhere in that arc, they get cut. So, what can we do with this problem? Well, we've got a couple of interesting solutions here. One solution is go and say, well, the violence isn't actually inherent in the system. These monks, they're not seeking a fight, and they accept the fact that they're going to be at a severe disadvantage if they fight people with weapons, and that's fine because they are non-violent. They practice to defend themselves, to perfect their spiritual disciplines. They're not here looking to pick a fight. That's a perfectly valid way to structure your monks, but it doesn't necessarily lend itself well to something like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign where players are going to be playing monks and they're going to be looking to roundhouse kick people off horses and do all sorts of crazy stuff like that. So what else can we do? Well, we can try and bring monks up to par with weapons. And this is where we can incorporate mystical powers and special monk weapons and a whole range of other things that we are going to cover in the 5 solutions section of this video. So, the second of our problems with monks. Training time. Like, just, do you know how long it takes to become really proficient with an edged weapon? Swords are hard. Swords are really difficult to master. And grappling? Also pretty hard. Not as hard as swords, but not easy. Striking arts? Getting a varied striking art up to a level where you can reasonably go and defeat somebody who is not as trained as you, but perhaps brawnier and bulkier, that's going to take a long time. You're really going to need to work at this. So we've begun investing a ton of our characters' time into martial arts training. Okay, that's fine. Maybe they just have time for this. But how does this exactly work with leveling up in a D&D setting? Right? We punched a bunch of brigands and now we're a better monk after like 3 weeks of brigand punching. Something's a bit weird here. Years of discipline and meditation and sitting beneath freezing waterfalls and meditating atop high dolems where the wind whirls around you when you hear the call of the ancestors. And 3 weeks of killing brigands and suddenly your fists are iron? That's not exactly how this ought to work. So we have a bit of a mismatch here where in many cases we portray monks as these venerable, cultured masters who have spent a ton of time investing into this incredibly difficult discipline, and then they keep on getting levels super swiftly. Or in the case of a novel, the main character keeps on gaining martial power or martial mastery at an unreasonable rate. That's another problem. We're probably going to have to do something about this. Third problem we often encounter with monks. In a lot of fantasy settings, monks thrive in, well, who'da thunk it, monastic orders. Disciplined, regimented lives led according to some strict spiritual set of guidelines that go and order the monk's day from sunrise to sunset. Oftentimes, we don't take the time to handle the shock that accompanies somebody leaving the monastery. The monk leaves the monastery and suddenly they are subject to all the temptations of the world, all of its vices and sins and all these things that they never had to deal with while they were meditating away. when people aren't exposed to temptation, it's very easy not to succumb to it, right? There's in Deep Space Nine, right, in Star Trek, Captain Sisko has a great line where he's ranting about the Federation and how, it's easy to be an angel in paradise. And that's really true. While that monk is in the monastery, cloistered away, it's very easy to follow their disciplines. It's very easy to keep their meditative and contemplative state. And oftentimes, I feel that we don't pay enough attention to the fact that a monk outside of their environment may be uncentered. Just by living in a city of vice and sin, just by, for the first time, being around people that they find sexually attractive, there's going to be a lot of things that throw them off of their game, and this is really going to impact their martial arts. So, fourth thing that we need to consider as a potential flaw with the way we depict monks. Why are monks always limited to the weapons they use? Like why is this actually a thing? Sometimes it's just like, what, you use your fists. You're a monk, you punch people. Well, okay, that was the first problem we had, right? This just kind of doesn't work unless we change something up pretty seriously. But staves and simple weapons and whatnot, and farming equipment, it makes sense in our world, right? Here, when we think of like the stereotypical, Chinese Shaolin monk, for example, yeah, it totally makes sense. They're walking around with a staff and with farming implements. They farmed. This is not weird. There's all this history and culture to back this up. We understand why they used the implements that they did. But in your fantasy setting, why are monks going to default back to farming equipment from East Asia? What? No, this is not good. This is not creative, and we can do better. All right. And finally, the fifth problem, and I think the one that is the most delicate. It is that so many monk abilities that we casually give monks would drive monks away from being monks. Let me explain. Slow falling, their incredible agility, the ability to climb like a spider monkey. Do you know how many professions there are in a medieval fantasy world where those abilities would make you tons of gold? Like being a mountain guide and having slow falling and the ability to climb at an absurd speed and just survive things that other people couldn't. Oh my goodness. Do you know how insanely dangerous it can be to go and explore certain delicate areas in large cave systems? The large cave systems that are like everywhere in a fantasy world? Monks. There should be a constant stream of monks leaving monasteries to pursue other professions. They go through their apprenticeship. They're now at the point where they have like the basic toolkit of monk abilities trained to the point where they're useful. And they just go, okay, see you, have fun. I'm off to make a boatload of money. Why are the monks all in the monastery? Is the spiritual draw just so intense? Is the cultivation of chi something that just takes all their time and dedication and people just don't wind up wanting to leave? What is this? It's a real problem, and one that I think the only book I know of off the top of my head that addresses this is actually Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, weirdly enough, where there's an order of, are they Galgafrinchen? I forget. They weren't Galgafrinchen. They're an order of psionic monks. They teach psychic powers, and their teaching methods for giving their disciples psychic powers are just amazing. But once you graduate, they seal you away in a cloister effectively forever, if I'm remembering it correctly. And so there's just tons of ex-monks who are just like, I'm now psychic. See you. I'm off to go and live the good life. And that really would happen to a ton of monks. So now that we've covered some of these problems, let's actually go and let's have 5 solutions that we can use to spice up our monks and just make them a little bit more interesting, a little bit more believable, and round out some of the harsh edges on these problems. Number 1, The solution to unarmed combat is honestly kind of simple. A, give them weapons. Just let them use weapons. Good weapons. Spears. If we look at like Shaolin monks, tons of spear forms. Right? Just give them spears. Spears are good weapons. Spears are wonderful weapons. Give them short swords. Give them all sorts of actual weapons. Problem solved. Alternatively, right, we can instead go and give them powers that make them into weapons. It is fascinating that if we look at the editions of Dungeons and Dragons that come out, depending upon the edition, we don't necessarily get anything more than flavor text talking about how monks repel edged weapons with bare hands and arms and legs. That should be front and center. If your monks are reasonably going to take on people with swords and whatnot, they are going to need to have the ability to resist edged weapons with their skin, or do something equivalent. And speed, super speed, does not cut it. There are so many problems with super speed that it literally deserves its own video. And I don't mean like flash levels of super speed, I just mean like twice the speed of a human speed. Already you're running into so many different problems. It's just, if you're going to go there, understand you're unpacking a can of worms. So, we can really go and solve that first problem in a twofold manner. Just give them weapons, or give them a reason why the weapons are not terribly important. Second thing that we can do to improve our monks is bring some of those philosophies front and center and make some of the philosophies as important as the martial arts. Maybe monks level up when they reach certain epiphanies. Maybe a monk's path is defined by more than just experience in a game. Maybe there are good deeds they must do. In fact, the oath of a paladin honestly probably makes a lot of sense to have a similar system in place for monks. There are some very strong similarities between their Dungeons and Dragons classes and the way they get treated in fantasy in general. So I, as a second solution to our monk problems, would highly advise people to go and list out the oaths that monks take to their order and use these as a set of guiding principles that determine how close to their centered Zen state your monk actually is. Or maybe they break off from that path and find their own road to enlightenment. That's also a possibility. Thirdly, make chi addictive. Not necessarily in a drug-like sort of way. Maybe it's like a runner's high. Maybe you take the satisfaction that people in this day and age often get from practicing a martial art, and we increase it with some extra mystical essence. Why? To keep monks being monks. To give them a reason to remain within their monastic orders and continue to achieve higher levels of enlightenment. Unless you want more monks roaming ex-monks roaming the land using their skills in various professions, which frankly is a really cool idea, and I'm kind of sad that nobody's really explored this for the most part yet. Maybe you could be the person who does it first. So go out there and you take that idea. But yeah, make a set of spiritual and physical rewards and structures that incentivize the right amount of monks in your setting sticking to their monastic orders to combat the reality that if you don't have something in place, monks are just going to leave. They're going to do better things. They're going to do things that get them lots of money because money is good in most societies. You can also change societal structures to incentivize monks to enter the monastery. A great example of this would be what happened at very unfortunately, like this is now we're getting into some real world tragedies here. Very unfortunately, with the Chinese spread into Tibet early on. So Buddhism's takeover of Tibet is actually really fascinating. At one point, a vast majority a significant percentage of all the men in the country were actually Buddhist monks, because it was a way to education and power and relative wealth. And it was, you could, oh, we can't take care of this son, let's send him to the temple. Oh, this is being endorsed because, right, it's solidifying the culture under an ideal that our conquerors effectively are okay with. I would actually highly encourage you to, if you're okay with stomaching some not so okay stuff, I would advise you to look into some of Tibetan history and the evolution of Tibetan Buddhism. It can get a bit dark at times, but it will show you some really interesting negative cultural pressures that led to a ton of people becoming monks. So, cool stuff, if a bit grim. And fourthly, I think it's fourthly, if at the end of this video I've miscounted, well then, oh well. We're going to go, and well, I'm going to suggest to you that you give your monks a broad set of skills. I don't often see monks given the right amount of education in things like philosophy and medicine and various religious practices, and even just basic things like climbing and whatnot. If we're always going back to the Shaolin Monastery, if you look at the educational set there, it varied widely from monk to monk. Part of this actually has to do with the history of the Shaolin Temple itself and how, like, exiled nobles were sent there, and so you had just all these eclectic skills building up. But this is such a great idea to have monasteries incorporate some of, in many ways, these more Western ideals of a monastery system as a place of education and learning, where monks gain these truly varied and fascinating skill sets. You can have a monk who is an incredible scribe. That's a fascinating way to go about things. Maybe you have a whole type of monks who go and they make rolled paper like prayer chimes and whatnot, or talismans and amulets that hold certain powers. There's a ton of really cool things you can do there, and there's so much inspiration to be drawn from real-world historic examples. The rolled or swung prayer bead rollers and whatnot from, well, actually, Tibet, of all places. Bamboo chimes that have prayers or spiritual mantras engraved upon them. There's a ton of really cool things that you can do there, where you can make your monks, you can literally have an order of monk artificers, drawing from our own world's historic traditions and injecting a healthy dose of fantasy in there. And if that is not the coolest thing ever, I do not know what is. And we're going to wrap this up with one last thing that I would like you guys to consider doing when you are next building monks into your world. And that is, stick them into the politics. This is such a travesty. It's something that is so integral to a monastery. Where are they getting their food? Are they farming all of it? Some cases, maybe. But oftentimes they're getting taxes from people. In our world, we have so many glorious examples of monks meddling in politics. There is a Chinese legend about a monk from the Shaolin Monastery, a noble, who went and became emperor, and also invented the three-section staff. Very cool stuff. Just look up the guy who invented this three-section staff, and you'll find out all sorts of stuff about him. Allegedly, this person may very well not even have existed. It's apocryphal, but it's a super cool story. And that's really what matters here. Monks meddled in politics all the time. Not just Western monks, Buddhist monks. They were incredibly powerful politicians. They went and waged wars. If we look at Ireland, oh my goodness, the number of wars monasteries waged is hilarious. I mean, it's not hilarious. Like, tons of people died. It was brutal. But you have, like, oh man, all across the British Isles, you have monasteries that exercise a ton of control over their local lands, and they were willing to back this up with very real violence. That is so cool. Give your monks political motivations. These people are primed to go and meddle in state affairs. And you know what? You know what's actually really interesting? A great franchise that does this really well interestingly enough, Avatar: The Last Airbender, the Dai Li, the secret police earthbenders in Ba Sing Se. If you have not watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, shame you need to go and do that. It's an amazing show and will give you great inspiration for your monks as well. But yeah, those are a couple of unfortunate things that I've noticed, just sort of as a cursory overview of monks, and a couple of things that we could really do to spice up and improve the monks we put into our worlds. So, in total, I just want you guys to think about that, and I want you to put your questions about monks down below in the comments. And if you are interested in learning more about some of the inherent problems that come about due to, well, fighting unarmed, and the ways that some of our misconceptions about how these fights go down percolate and accumulate and really can screw us over, I would highly advise you to check out the YouTube channel Armchair Violence. The guy who runs it has a ton of fun content. Oftentimes there's this hilarious clickbait title, and then you go into it, and a sensationalist, I should say, and you actually go into the video, and obviously there's a much more nuanced take, and there's also lots of interesting stuff. It's a ton of fun. The guy's channel is criminally underrated. Really ought to go and check him out. I will put a link to his channel down below, so you have fun with that. And until next time, be kind, not cruel, and may all of your dreams, at least the very good ones, come true, and may all of your misfortunes fall lightly upon your life, and may you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. See you.